Hi, it's Rory from counsellingtutor.com, and today I'm with Bob Cooke at the Manchester Institute for Psychotherapy, and we're going to talk about questions.
Yes, questions and how to ask questions in psychotherapy and counselling.
Yes, and I think it's really, really important that therapists, students or practicing therapists really have a good idea of how they question, because it can lead to some quite big difficulties in therapy where I've heard, certainly as a trainer, students who've not kind of integrated a questioning strategy. Sounds more like a police interview than it does a therapeutic encounter.
Yeah.
So what are your thoughts on questioning, Bob?
Well, I remember one of my my hedonistic youth, if you like, being interviewed by the police of a certain incident which we won't go into particularly, but I know what I know. I felt interrogated, and what I wanted to do most of all was get away.
Yes.
And I think that if the receiver feels interrogated by the therapist, even though the therapist doesn't mean it,
yes,
they won't come back.
No.
They'll want to keep away, or they'll close down.
Yes.
And the very thing that the therapist needs to do, which is get information, learn about person's life plan, their coping decisions, what's happened to them in their story, their script analysis, won't happen.
No.
And it will be very productive, and at the best, therapy will take longer.
Or not at all, because people just won't turn up.
Yeah. So I
think at this point, we for those people who might maybe watch and think, what are these two guys talking about? Questions, which is an open question in itself, isn't it?
Yeah.
There's different forms of questioning, and the ones that we favour in counselling and psychotherapy are open questions.
Yeah.
And they can be characterised by who, what, when, where, and how. They're questions that don't have a yes or a no answer. They invite a bigger response.
And close down.
Yes, and they don't close down somebody. So, I know when I'm training students in counselling skills, Bob, if I could take a video camera, sometimes some of the students will be asking lots of questions. Was it like this? Well, no. Well, was it like that? No. Well, was it like that? No. Well, what about this? No. And it can be quite amusing to watch, but incredibly frustrating for the person who's the speaker, because all they want the person to say is, "How was it for you? Tell me about that."
Yes, and I mean that's. I remember when I was on a counselling course, sort of 30 years ago, and I learned about open and closed questions, just the way you're talking about there. And I suppose I didn't really realise the importance of it, but 30 years on, I can assure you that if you want to build up a working relationship with your clients, you don't ask closed questions.
No.
So I can agree with you. I'd like to talk a little bit about a form of questioning.
Okay.
Which is called inquiry. INQ, not E. Inquiry.
Okay.
It's a form of how to ask questions.
Yes.
So it's inquiring about a person. And I would like to split up inquiry questioning, if you like, into two parts, or
Okay.
two classifications. Historical inquiring and phenomenological inquiring.
Easy for you to say, Bob.
And I'm dyslexic. So historical inquiry and phenomenological inquiry. Took me a long time to learn how to spell and say phenomenological. So let's start with the first classification, which is historical inquiry. Right? Now, psychotherapy is based on the presenting past. In other words, how the past influences the present.
Yes.
Yeah? And counselling to a certain extent.
I think if you talk about certain events, we may inquire about how those events have impacted on the client. Yes, so I think there's a common ground there.
Yeah. Okay. So if you're doing if you're going to take that premise, how the past affects the present, you need to ask historical questions, which is called historical inquiring. So, and when you think of your dad, who does that remind you of today? Historical questions.
Yes.
So you're gathering information about their past and seeing how it affects today.
Yes.
You'll do a lot of that. Then there's the whole classification called phenomenological inquiry, which is more aimed at, in transaction analysis, their child ego state. So that will be, how was that for you? Tell me a little bit more about that feeling. So it's actually giving them permission to talk about their own experience in a wider sense, or the phenomena of their experience in a wider sense in the present.
Yes. And we, in person-centered therapy, we would call that kind of experiential questioning. Phenomenology is the study of whole body feeling reactions. It's a philosophy. So the phenomenological approach, we should rehearse it as much as you've done, Bob, would mean that we're talking about the entire experience of somebody, the whole mechanism of feeling and thinking.
So you've got two types of questions.
Yes, two types.
Yeah, and then another aspect of asking questions, which I think is really very important, and I'd like to hear a little bit from you on this, but I'll talk a little bit about it, which is what I'll call here attunement. In other words, attunement means really being able to attune to the person's pace, attune to the person's rhythm, attune to the person's developmental age. So in other words, if you're going to ask questions to somebody who's 6, it'll be very different than how you ask questions to somebody who's 13.
Yes.
So if a client's regressed to a specific age, you will ask a different type of question.
Yes.
So you need to attune to their developmental age when asking questions. You need to attune to their rhythm. So for example, somebody who comes in who is very high in anxiety and rushed, and their rhythm, even their natural rhythm, might be quicker in terms of delivery, then you need to attend to that. And if you get somebody who's very slow in their pacing, you need to go to that level as well.
Absolutely.
So the way you ask questions is attuned to their personality style.
Yes.
Do you see it that way?
I do. I think that it is about getting as near to the client's self as you can be.
Correct.
With your questioning. I also think that sometimes if you've got a client who's really anxious, by pacing your questions a little slower, you can actually slow them down as well.
Correct. And that's really, really important.
Yes.
Otherwise, they may well just adapt you.
Yes.
And give you the answer to the question they think that you're after.
Absolutely. Which isn't inquiry at all, is it?
Which is not inquiry
at all. No.
And the other thing I like to think about when I ask questions is another concept for integrative psychotherapy called involvement. So far we've got inquiry, attuning to the rhythm, the pace of the client, and now into involvement. And involvement means that in the delivery of the question is an element of curiosity, that you're involving yourself in your energetic approach, in your curiosity and your validation on, well, let's explore this whole perspective that we're talking about.
Sure.
So it's just not like, how are you, I don't know, how are you today? Or even if you say inquiring, well, tell me a little bit about what you're feeling. You go a little bit further. You get a level of specificity. You get more curious. You get more involving in the dialogue. So it's not just a question, it's a whole perspective.
Yes. And I think when we're talking about involvement, we have to separate that from being nosy.
So is that different for curiosity?
Yes, curiosity. Yes, and I think we have to be thoughtful. that clients will tell us stories which may arouse our interest. And what we have to be careful of is not to fulfill our demand for that interest by their story. We need to be working in their frame of reference. So it's not prizing information out of people. It's about working with their frame of reference.
Well, yeah. Well, you're talking more about violation, I think.
Absolutely.
And I see. I understand where you're coming from. Yeah, of course. If you're gonna, if your ego is going to be more superseding their ego,
yes,
then you're squashing them rather than actually promoting them to talk.
Absolutely. Just remind ourselves that the client isn't a living soap opera. That they're, and it's not. We don't want to know the plot lines. We're trying to use the questions to help them explore themselves.
Yeah, I think it's so important because at the end of the day, the contract between you and the other person is about them, not you.
Absolutely.
So that's a very good point. So we've got inquiry questions, which can be phenomenological,
yes,
or historical.
Yes.
We've got pacing, we've got attunement, we've got involvement. So we've got different ways of looking how to, deliver these questions.
Yes.
And then we have to think about why we're asking questions
in
the first place.
Yes.
Now, transaction analysis. One of the purposes behind questions is to help them talk about their own life story, so that you can do something called script analysis. So you can start understanding their script means life plan.
Yes. Understanding
their life plan and how it affects today. So you can start in transaction analysis again, looking for things like drivers and injunctions, but most important, the decisions they made back then.
Yes.
In a ways of coping.
Yes.
And how it affects today, so that they can change their script and get a new life plan on the road.
Sure.
So the questions are oriented towards a certain clinical direction.
That's interesting, because in person-centered therapy, we use questioning to inform people's awareness, to help them kind of expand their choice that they have. Yes. So a slightly different approach, really. Slightly different.
Yeah, that's why I wanted to say it.
Yeah.
Because there are certain purposes in asking questions. Now, in Gestalt psychotherapy, for example, and where you just said it, which I found really interesting, I'm not saying you wouldn't do that in TA or integrated psychotherapy, is to help the person develop more awarenesses, so they then can make new decisions about themselves, or at least think about how those awarenesses reflect today. So, in Gestalt psychotherapy, people would ask questions much more focused on what we would call interruptions to contact, and the levels of awareness, how they are in the here and now, or how they break contact in the relationship. But it's interesting, because if you think of CBT therapists or behavioural therapists, their questions might be more aimed, with CBT for example, different frames of references, different thought processes.
Yes.
In behavioural psychotherapy or behaviouralism, it might be, the questions might be aimed at, what behaviours are self-limiting or self-destructive?
Yes. Or how could you do that differently?
Yeah. Where I suppose I'm going with it is that in clinical work, questions need to, how can I explain this? The questions aren't just random. They have a clinical purpose.
Yes. Yes, they are delivered with thought on the part of the therapist for hopefully an outcome.
Yeah, it's not what we are into the business of what Eric Byrne would call just simply pastime.
Yes. Is that what he called it? Pastiming.
Yeah. We are in the business of, not only finding out about a person's history and how it affects the present, past and ever, but also helping them understand and becoming more aware, so they can be different today. And I think how we deliver these questions are really important.
Yes.
So we can help the person become more, feel more safe, more secure, more open, more trusting, so they can actually talk to you, which is the first step, surely, in being a psychotherapist. But also, what these questions are aimed at.
Yes.
So, for an example, in one of my clients, we always start, not always, because I don't think always in psychotherapy, but we might start talking about football. Now, that could be seen as pastime therapy, but it also, I know, it's the most extreme passion that he has in life. So the reasons why I might ask, how did Stoke City get on at the weekend? Because it's maybe a way of getting it to a place where he feels easier to talk to you.
Yes.
So there's always clinical thought behind the questions.
Building rapport that's a case of building rapport.
Very good example.
Yes.
Building rapport so you get to his child ego state with TA.
Yes. And I guess in person-centered therapy, that's about just building the relationship and building, a consensus between yourself and the client. I always think questions are fascinating, and one of the biggest lessons, Bob, that I learned about how to ask questions and not to be too clever with questioning. I did a little bit of work while I was training as a support teacher's assistant in a college in South Manchester with children with learning difficulties, and we did a quiz. The teacher did a quiz, and I was tasked to help the learners find the answers without telling them the answers. And one of the questions was art. So the question was art, and we had to question them in a way that they think that the answer was art. And I spent a long time questioning these young people, not getting very far at all, and I thought my questioning was brilliant. And I could see the teacher getting more and more frustrated, and eventually said, I think we'll just call it a halt there. And he said, right guys, what do we do on Wednesday? And the kids went, art, right answer. So sometimes it is about using questioning thoughtfully and not stacking them up one after the other.
Yes, okay, great. So we've talked about some of the bases of asking questions and the clinical direction of questions, and there's another, I just want to add another thing, and that's to do with personality types.
Right.
So for example, someone who's more paranoid, you may decide to ask a question in a different way than someone who's sort of withdrawn and more schizoid and more internal. So I think dependent on their level of personality may determine when and how you ask the question.
Absolutely. And this comes down to this old adage of knowing your client, building relationship, knowing your client, knowing what their style is, what their working style is.
Yeah, and I think I think what I wanted to ask, really talk, I don't know, 10 minutes on this video, is that I've been training therapists for 30 years. You've been training people with counselors and therapists for goodness knows how long as well. And for me, beginning therapists usually find asking questions so difficult because they don't know when to ask them.
Yes.
They don't know how to ask them. And often they don't even know what the purpose of asking the question is in the first place.
Yes. Timing and the consequence of asking the question. I always say, what are you asking that question for? What do you hope to gain?
And we're in the art of a therapeutic conversation, not a pastiming event.
Yes.
And I think as therapists and counsellors, we need to learn how to ask questions to aid the therapeutic conversation. It's an art.
It is.
It's a real art.
It is.
And it's an art I'd really want to get over. That it's a skill. It's something you learn. So that's really what I wanted to say.
Okay, well, as we come to the end of this video, I think open questions are always the most useful.
Always.
But there are times when closed questions are useful.
Yeah, and let me tell you something. When somebody has a psychotic disturbance, when somebody starts to go away from reality, when somebody gets stuck perhaps in a different regressed age, where you need to say, get grounded now, look around the room, tell me what age you are, what age are you?
Yes.
So you've been very specific in the questions to get them into an adult ego state, to get them in the here and now, So you're bringing them back. That's when you might
Absolutely.
ask closed questions.
Yes, when you're looking for a specific answer, and you want that information delivered really quickly for the benefit of the client. So as we end this video, I think we'll end it on a closed question. Fancy another cup of tea, Bob?
Yes.
Yes. So thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Bye bye.
Thank God. That's good.
That's what I knew. I was tempted to say yes, Rory, but I wonder what I feel about that.
Right, I think we're just about done now.
I think we're just about done.
Yeah.